God is the one who calls, and we have to listen. We have to be able to hear. In order to hear, you gotta quiet down. If somebody's calling you, but you're making a bunch of noise, you won't hear them. So the same in your spiritual life, you have to quiet down. You have to have a regular life of prayer. Prayer is to raise your mind and your heart to God. Somebody might go to a religious life and discern for a time, and maybe even in temporary vows. Well, that's part of what the church might say gives us with temporary vows is it's continuing the discernment while getting the benefit of a consecration. But when the consecration is made sort of permanently, you decide you're accepted, and you make the offer of your life. It's not something you want to take back. So when our community began in 1978, our founder, Father Abbot William Driscoll, he started with the inspiration of God and the help of His grace. He started in Rockport, Massachusetts, and after a couple of years, he encountered the Maronites and met the Maronite Archbishop, Francis Zayak, who is retired now. He invited Father Abbot to become Maronite. He was Latin. He was under the Archdiocese of Boston when he began. And so in the early 1980s, Father Abbot began in 1978. In the early 80s is when they decided, the Maronites accepted us, they invited us, and then they accepted us as part of the Maronite Church, Maronites here in the United States. And we ended up here in Petersham, Massachusetts after a couple of moves. The Maronites, of course, are Catholics of the eastern part of the Catholic Church. So since 1978, we've been with Father Abbot as our spiritual father under St. Maron, under the Maronites. Our life is a contemplative life of prayer, and liturgical prayer is first and foremost in anybody's life, whether you're a monk or you're a layman or whatever. That's our first prayer, because that's the prayer of Christ and the prayer of the Church. So we join ourselves to that prayer. Outside of liturgy, our life, our private prayer, individual prayer, here at this monastery, our particular gift from God is that we make our prayer before the Blessed Sacrament exposed. Each monk does 2 hours of Eucharistic adoration outside of the liturgy each day. And so I don't know of any other monasteries or monastic life, east or west, that's true, that's the case. Maybe there are, I don't know of them. Latin is a language, and in terms of prose and poetry, that likes to compress a lot into a few words, whereas the Maronite liturgy likes to elaborate everything, repeat things over and over. So it's much more, the prayers are much longer, there's a lot of repetition. We say in one of the feasts we have for some Maronite martyrs, the monks who were killed for the teaching of the Council of Chalcedon, our faith is the faith of Peter, and the faith of Peter is ours. The Church of Peter is our church, and the Church of Peter is ours. So they like to repeat things, they like to, just like anybody who loves to ruminate on something, to think of something that's delightful and good and holy and true, you like to think about it over and over. And so that's what's characteristic, at least to me, from being here for a few years. Most of our liturgy is in English. But there are some prayers or hymns that we always have in Aramaic, which is the language our Lord spoke. We have always at Mass, the consecration is always chanted and always in Aramaic. Some other prayers during the Mass, like we call it the Trisagion, or in Aramaic, the Kadishat Aloho, Holy God, Holy Strong One, Holy Immortal One, have mercy on us. We always chant that in Aramaic. We also do, it's not mandatory, but we've chosen to do it, is at midday prayer we chant the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, in Aramaic. So that's a privilege. The one privilege of the Maronites, they always say, is that they've always been under St. Peter and his successors. And the other is that we have as our language the language of Christ himself for our liturgy. So. As a friend of ours said many years ago, he used to run some errands for us. And he used to go uptown, and some of the locals they asked him once, they said, well, are you their contact with reality? And he said, no, they're my contact with reality. And the reason is, I think, because God is reality. That's the real thing, is God himself. When you live a life without that, they call that the real world, but that's the illusion. And that's why it's so frantic and so crazy, is because they're missing the one thing that's real. And so when people come here, that's in some way what we give it to them, not by any design. It's just that's what happens. That's the natural, you want to call it the dynamic of our life, is that we give ourselves to God. Well, he uses us as instruments to give himself to others. And that's what I think people who actually come down here, that's what that I can only tell you what I've heard them say. And then others who maybe never come here, I suppose that's our best contribution, is that we become sort of like the light on the stand our Lord spoke of in the gospel. Despite ourselves, despite our own limitations and sins, we give light to the world in a certain way. So. We begin at 5, the bell rings at 5 o'clock, and we go to prayer at 5:20. We have our morning prayer, which lasts, given the season, it's between 30-40 minutes, so until about 6 o'clock. Then we have quiet time for adoration of the Blessed Sacrament before Mass, or they'll do some spiritual reading or study before Mass. Mass is at 7:30, which ordinarily weekdays would last about an hour. From 8:30 or so, when Mass ends, until basically noontime, that's more time. Some monks do chores. Somebody has to cook the noon meal, and somebody's got to greet guests if they have to come or go. And so there's some chores, but usually the morning time is for more adoration, study. Some of the monks might take a walk, get some exercise in the morning. Necessary business, correspondence, whatever you have to do. In noontime, we have our midday prayer, a little before noon, and then we go to the meal. We eat in silence. Most of our day, we try to spend as much time in silence as we can. We can speak as needed, but generally, we want to keep silence to cultivate a spirit of recollection and prayer. After the noon meal and siesta time, then we have our work period in the afternoon until about 4:30. Then it's supper time, almost, just about supper time, enough time to clean up. Our evening prayer at 6:20 till about 7 o'clock. And then after that, most nights, it's sometimes there's classes they'll have in the evening for philosophy, theology, whatever it might be, for novices, for the rule, anything else. And otherwise, it's adoration or study, if you have necessary chores to do. 3 nights a week we have recreation, where we sit around and talk. And Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. But also on certain feast days we'll have recreation, whether it's on Sunday, Tuesday, or Thursday. And then the night prayer is a little before 9 o'clock, about 9 o'clock. And then we retire after that. So. Days we'll